Going to begin in a moment with our international panel. And we, in April of this year, had one of our global energy summits in London. And if you would like any of the thought pieces for that, please just let us know, or any of my partners or the event organizers, and you can compare your notes to this exceptional panel that we will have here as well. And I think this panel will confer very, very favorably. We are going to begin, we'll be talking about international issues generally. We'll focus on Europe initially. We're going to be talking further about climate and COP21 and other strategic issues in Europe and Eurasia. We had hoped to sneak in Lisa Murkowski, who wanted very much to stop by and say hello, particularly say hello to Anne Levergeon and this group, but she's voting instead today, so sends her regrets, and she was a surprise visitor, but she will not be able to be with us this morning. Our first panelist, Anne Levergeon, who will cover Europe, climate, COP21, is a senior advisor to Dentons. She's also one of the most recognized and extraordinary women leaders in Europe. In 2006, Anne was ranked as the second most powerful woman in Europe by Fortune magazine. She was, in 2009, advanced to the global stage and was ranked as the 9th most powerful woman in the world. Of course, at Dentons, Anne is ranked #1. She was the first CEO of Arriva. She is on way too many prestigious boards and functioning in too many prestigious ways to list. It would take the rest of the morning. She did serve as the Sherpa for President Mitterrand at the G7 summits. And I'm just going to ask at the back of the room if you could close those doors so that we can give courtesy to our speakers. Our second panelist, David Karani, is Deputy Director of the Eurasia Center at the Atlantic Council, also Director of the Atlantic Council's Eurasian Energy Future Initiative. He has also had a remarkable career in the country of Hungary, where he has served in many positions, including Undersecretary of State and Chief Foreign Policy Advisor and National Security Advisor to the Prime Minister. And so we're going to begin our program now hearing from the amazing Anne Levergeon.
Thank you very much, Clint, for this introduction. To be one of the most powerful women, that was very important for me, because for my son, it gave me a huge prestige. He was thinking that it was a matter of muscles. And so he had a mother with a lot of muscles, which is unfortunately not totally right. Clint, you assigned us a mission impossible. You will have to depict the energy outlook in 10 minutes for the next energy event in Washington, D.C. If you accept this mission, this tape will self-destruct in 10 seconds. Unfortunately, I have accepted this mission. How to refuse, Clint, to refuse something to you and to Dentons. But it's mission impossible. We are experiencing, in my view, revolutionary times in the energy field. How to depict so many changes and more than to make credible forecasts afterwards. It's clear that world needs energy and more energy. But at the same time, who 5 years ago would have imagined, for instance, bankruptcies in this new sector in the US of new companies dedicated to shale oil? Who had imagined in the future, in the past, 5 years ago, not a long time ago, US becoming new net exporter of oil? Who had imagined low prices expected over the medium term for the Brent? Who could have imagined also huge write-offs in Europe for utilities like the former GDF Suez, NG now, $14 billion last year. The write-off of the majority of their investments in gas field because it's not anymore profitable in the European system. Like RVE, like E.ON, deciding E.ON. Do you imagine E.ON with its nuclear plants, with its coal fire plants, deciding to be fully dedicated only to non-conventional ways of producing energy? So we are experiencing a brand new world. And of course, for the investors, situation is very destabilizing. How to invest, where to invest, in which types of energy sources to invest. So that's a reason where we have so many questions and not a lot of answers. And we have to recognize that we have made a lot of mistakes in the recent past. And it is so difficult because when you invest into new sources of energy, it's by definition for the next 20, 30, 40, 50, if it is a dam, 100 years. How to make the right investments in such a situation? It's clear that we are now, when I say that we are in a revolutionary times, who would have expected, for instance, only 1 year ago, 2 years ago, that China is going to change its appetite for growth somewhere, but also for energy? Who could have imagined also very recently that energy demand in Europe is going not only to stagnate, but to decrease? So it's clear also that after the events and the geopolitical dimension is very present in energy, of course, the comeback of Iran and the comeback of the barrels, the Iranian barrels in the games, are going to change a lot of things. But also the new bans around Russia. What's going to happen in the next years with Russia in the system? To simplify the things, we have known an accident, Fukushima, who has changed also a lot of things. For new nuclear first, because new nuclear clearly is now, we have spent 3-4 years without a lot of appetite for new nuclear, and also because of the new prices of oil and gas. How to be competitive for new builds when you have such cheap prices in oil and gas? And of course, after Fukushima, we have known a period of time where Japan has needed a lot of gas supply to feed the economy. It's going to have an end. And on the top of that, we have this terrible issue around climate change. Climate change imposes a new energy mix globally, or is going to, but when? Are we going to have a successful outcome of COP21, the last meeting in Paris for this climate change convention? You know why it is in Paris? Because nobody wanted to have this convention at home. And why? Because the last one in Denmark, in Copenhagen, that was such a failure that the government has been obliged to partly change to be reshuffled and with a lot of turmoil around. So the French president said, why not in Paris? Oh yes, in Paris. And this convention is going to be very, very complicated. Why? Because it's a convention among all the countries of the United Nations. One country, one vote. The alignment of all the countries, do you imagine what it means? How the interests are different around the globe on these specific issues, and how technical it is. I don't know if you have the internal knowledge, but within this convention, a lot of topics are in discussion, from the forest to the development of countries, to the founding of all of that. It's highly political and highly technical. So it means that it is highly to expect easily a solution. So we have now in Paris high-level meeting with the different ministers coming from the different parts of the world, and it shows that it's going to be very, very complicated. It's clear that we have also good pieces of news. For instance, the agreement between China and US. The fact that we have some bilateral commitments, some, I may say, unilateral commitments. But it's clear that we are also, we are going to be in big trouble if we have no achievement, because it's also highly regarded by the young generation, expecting some achievements on that. As I said before, geopolitical consequences of Iran, the comeback of Iran, of the situation of Russia vis-à-vis the rest of the world, geopolitical consequences of a failure, of a possible failure of COP21, the difficulties for energy players worldwide. I mentioned bankruptcies in the US, or difficult situation for some players in the US, but I could mention that the utilities are globally under a lot of stress. And the big risk we have, the main risk in my view, is to have investors starting to think that to invest into energy fields is not so attractive. It's so complicated, so difficult, with so many ups and downs. So if I look, and you said it's an international panel, so I'm going to take 1 minute about Europe. Europe, how to be a utility now in Europe? It's so difficult. Imagine you are in a situation where the demand is between to be stable or low, but generally speaking, lower than stable. And you are experiencing declining prices, which is brand new. We have known 10 years of booming prices, and the expectations were, and the investments were made because of those expectations to have better and better prices. And of course, those utilities know the problem of their financial debts, like some players in the US, which means a lot of work to refinance, but it's not a way to push to new investments. And of course, the European players have said, okay, if it is so difficult in Europe, we are going to invest outside Europe. Outside Europe, in the US now, not so obvious. Emerging countries, not so obvious too. Of course, for Dentons, it means a lot of legal issues, so legal stuff. But for the utilities, they know that it is not so easy to develop new activities in the system. So it means that for the European players, you have more and more the business model questioned. Do they have to keep as they are? Do they have to evaluate? That's an issue. I would like to, saying very rapidly and to conclude with that, that innovation in this context is going to be the key element. Who is going to be innovate, at which pace, and how? And I think that it's going to change also the landscape. First, we are going to have a huge development of energy efficiency at the consumer level and at the producer level. Internet of Things as a main lever at both levels. Internet of Things, and I am ready to speak a lot about it, I think is going to change a lot of things. Smart grids, demand-based management systems, but also, I would like to say that, we are going maybe to experience new players. Data are going to be the main drivers. And the relationship, the direct relationship with the end user, the fact that maybe could give some brand names, Google for instance, but some others, are going to have the direct interface with the final client, could create the conditions of, the existing players being in threat to become only suppliers of other companies. So that was in 10 minutes.
Mission
Clint,
Impossible.
mission.
That's really stunning. Thank you, Anne. David.
Thank you, Clint. Let me start by thanking Dentons and Navigant for the kind invitation. Carl Hopkins, Clint, you put together an excellent conference and a great discussion so far. I think the other Mission Impossible is mine to speak after Anne, who is a legend and a role model, and it's going to be very, very difficult to follow this act. But nevertheless, what I will try to do as briefly as possible is to essentially pick two of the game changers from your excellent list this morning, Clint, and elaborate on them a bit. One is China and the other one is Iran. China, and I think this is the biggest development in the last 12 months from a climate perspective, and several of the speakers, including Anne and also George in the first panel, alluded to this, has finally come around to take climate change seriously. And you can argue about the reasons, and I fully agree that this is mainly domestically driven. This is mainly a political stability issue. Pollution has become such a political issue in urban centers that the leadership had to act. But the leadership, nevertheless, is taking this issue seriously. And the Politburo really threw up an action item list that is truly impressive. And I'm very, very optimistic about China's aggressive move into tackling climate change. Let's see some of these measures, because I think they are worth just outlining. One is that in the deal with Obama last fall, China for the first time actually agreed to peak its emissions by 2030. This was the first time they have made commitments before, but those commitments were based on unit of GDP per energy, which did not put a cap on the absolute emissions in the future. And beyond that political commitment, there is, again, as I mentioned, a very elaborate game plan of about 110 policy measures to tackle climate change in the next 20 years. And some of them are familiar from other regions. One is a national emission trading scheme that is going to be based on the already ongoing 7 pilot projects that have been set up in China in the last couple of years. And based on the experience with those, they will set up by the end of 2016, which I believe is overly optimistic, but nevertheless, in the next couple of years, there will be a nationwide emission trading scheme in China. The second one is a la EPA, I would say, is lowering the coal consumption of new coal-fired power plants to 300 grams per kilowatt hour. So that's also a very aggressive move into putting a cap on the CO2 emissions coming from coal-fired power plants. And then, of course, increasing the share of non-fossil fuel in the primary energy consumption to around 20% by 2030, which is a very, very ambitious target. If you look at the numbers, that will mean about an addition of about 900 gigawatts of renewable and nuclear generating capacity that is actually roughly the same than the thermal generating capacity of China today. So it's a huge task. And then about 2/3 of that is going to be wind and solar, which will in turn, I believe, will help driving further down the prices and the costs of renewables on a global scale. And then finally on China, I think a critically important element which is a testament to the effectiveness of already earlier measures that China put in place is that for the first time in 2014, coal consumption actually declined in China. This was the first time actually since the Asian financial crisis that this has happened, and it declined by 1.3%. So for the first time, I think we have a fairly good chance of seeing coal consumption in China peak well before the 2020 goal that China set for itself to peak coal consumption. I did not want to paint an overly rosy picture going into Paris. I fully agree with Anne that we are still a very long way off from the 2 degrees Celsius target that we need to accomplish. But nevertheless, the momentum that we generated going into Paris is a lot different than the momentum we had when we went into Copenhagen in 2009. So I think we have come a long way. Second issue, Iran. This is a fairly recent development, and of course there is a lot of optimism about the potential prospective role of Iran returning to the international oil and gas markets as a major player. And I, on the one hand, of course, believe in this potential. On the other hand, what I see is that this is going to be fraught with political risk, technical risk, investment risk, and it's not going to be a straightforward process. As the FT, Financial Times, put it just the other day, Iran is like a multi-billion-dollar oil and gas candy store of sorts, which is just opening up. And the potential investors in my mind are like kids who are about to enter into this candy store. But then there are also, the parents are in the background, and they are sort of trying to figure out how much of their pocket money the kids will be able to spend, and then what will be the conditions to spend that pocket money. And then also the parents, which are the states, the US, Europe, are sort of looking at how the candy store is going to function, and whether the political rules of the candy store will be kosher, to use a non-appropriate expression here. But nevertheless, Iran's potential is indeed huge. If you look at the oil sector, Iran has about fifths of, or it's the 5th largest oil reserves in the world. Currently, Iran producing is about 3.5 billion BPD, per day. That could be increased in the next 6 to 12 months by about 800 BPD, which is already a significant addition to the production capacity of Iran. Some of it is crude, some of it is condensate. And then by 2020, which is a fairly conservative assessment, but by 2020, this could be further increased by about 650 to 700 K when it comes to crude oil, and about 1 million BPD when it comes to condensate that is mainly going to come from South Pars. So there is a significant, and this is a conservative assessment, there is a significant upstream production capacity increase when it comes to Iran. But then in practice, if you look at, again, the risks, there are many. The political risk will remain significant, and yes, the deal will likely hold in the next 12, 18, maybe even 24 months. But it's very hard to predict how it's going to be beyond that. There might be a snapback of sanctions. Many of the investors are, of course, aware of that risk. Iran's, let's say, infamous bureaucracy is going to be a severe obstacle to any foreign investment in the country. The technological challenges, especially to re-increase production from the brownfields, are quite enormous. The investment needs, and again, this is a fairly low assessment, is at least $70 billion US dollars by 2020 to meet these conservative goals I just outlined in the oil sector. And then finally, the investment framework that will be, in theory, unrolled in December is unclear right now whether that's going to be the right investment framework to be able to draw in foreign investment on the scale that then the upstream potential will be fulfilled. I'm just going to stop here and looking forward to the discussion. Thank you very much.
Thank you, David. Beautiful job, and thank you both for keeping us on schedule. We're really glad that His Excellency Dr. Neil Parsan was able to join us today. He has had a particularly difficult schedule this morning and really went out of his way to be able to join us. His Excellency is Ambassador of the Republic of Trinidad and Tobago. He holds these degrees: medical degree, MBA, registered financial consultant from Harvard, and World Trade professional degree. So if any of you ever appear on Jeopardy, this is the man you want standing nearby. The ambassador is also chairman of the Global Gas Council, and as with each of our distinguished panelists right now, his distinctions are so long that we will, their bios are in your packet. I have not done anyone sufficient justice with my introductions, but we're so pleased that you could join us as well.
Thank you very much, Mr. Waterway, and I'm actually humbled by your introduction. Thank you. And first of all, let me sincerely apologize for being late. I literally came off a plane, then a train, then here. Having said that, though, let me thank you. And let me really applaud Dentons for really having this meeting, and thanking all of you for being here this morning and participating in what I think is a critical discussion, especially in today's environment. Having said that, ladies and gentlemen, I've been asked to say a few words really and focus the conversation. We heard some very constructive thoughts coming from Europe, and we heard some perspectives from China and Iran, and I would like to bring this conversation to our hemisphere and talk a bit about a beautiful place where I come from, the Caribbean, as well as a bit on Latin America. And just to bring focus the conversation, we have had many challenges in the Caribbean of late. One is the decline in the tourism sector. There's a tremendous debt crisis for many of the islands and many of the countries of Latin America, particularly South America. Many countries of the Caribbean, we have lost preferential treatments for some of our goods and services that we export, and of course, the cost of energy, which is why we're here to speak about. I come from Trinidad and Tobago, and I think all of you are acutely aware that we are very much one of the antiquated countries that have been involved in the energy sector for well over 108 years now. And we have also specialized highly into specialty chemicals, ammonia, urea, methanol, where we control close to 20% of the world market in those products. And we're the 6th largest exporter of LNG globally. We export to about 21 countries, matched only by Qatar and Nigeria at this present moment. But really focusing the conversation in the Caribbean, energy is a serious issue. And Mr. Moderator, if I may jump the gun a bit, I do not like to speak on the issue of energy because I think the conversation ought to be fast forward to really split the conversation into electricity and transport, because when the energy conversation takes place, which is critical, it really looks at source supply and the supply issue, but it really tends to dilute the strategies that countries can adopt to deal with mitigation and adoption when you actually split the conversation and talk about electricity and transport. In the Caribbean, 22% of our energy consumption is actually targeted towards the transport sector. So if we really want to speak of the whole issue of energy and energy security, I like to reverse re-engineer the process from the end user, go back to production side of it. Having said that, we have been straddled, the Caribbean as a whole, not necessarily Trinidad and Tobago, because we produce electricity, let's say, at 5 cents per kilowatt hour. But the average cost in the Caribbean is close to 33 cents, way higher in Central America and Latin America. Some countries, for example, Bahamas, have straddled with a 44-cent kilowatt hour electricity generation capacity, which really, in the cases of Latin America and the Caribbean, lowers competitiveness. It disincentivizes private sector investment, and it, to an extent, it encourages microeconomic and macroeconomic instability, which has been a perpetual cycle, adding into the vicious cycle of overall insecurity in the hemisphere. I think we all acutely aware of the whole Petrocaribe arrangement in which 18 countries of our hemisphere are currently engaged, coming from Venezuela, with some fairly favorable terms for some of these countries, but the overall sense is that there is an irregularity of supply. It really disincentivizes countries for technological adoption when it comes to having this level of dependence. There's a level of perception of political dependence on such an arrangement. And overall, it has really not encouraged foreign direct investment opportunities in many of our countries. Trinidad and Tobago is not a part of this, but many other countries are. So we refrain really from speaking of the issue, but we have to come to terms with the change in terms of such an arrangement. For example, countries like Honduras, countries like the Dominican Republic have expressed their concerns about the irregularity of supply. Guatemala, I know, has pulled out of the arrangement. And it also has implications for us in the hemisphere as far as, for example, TPP and TTIP is concerned, and what those trade arrangements may mean for the hemisphere. Not to mention, close to 35% of the debt of the Caribbean is attributable towards Petrocaribe. I'll tell you, for example, Jamaica's GDP, 14% of Jamaica's debt, Grenada's debt, is attributable towards Petrocaribe. But we have some solutions, and we have been looking and discussing this very, very closely as a region, together with institutions like the Organization of American States, to which I am an ambassador to, as well as, for example, the Inter-American Development Bank. Recent studies by the IDB have shown by the year 2035, the Caribbean would need close to 12 billion USD worth of investments to really say it's a space of energy security. 24 billion is estimated to be needed for Central America, particularly by the same year. And when you look at that in the context of the projected load growth for the next 2 decades is well over 3%. So increasing demand, lack of proper financing mechanisms going forward. I was very, very pleased to read very shortly, just about 2 or 3 days ago, the Prime Minister of Trinidad and Tobago had announced during the Summit of the Americas held in Cartagena the need for us to really look at opportunities for financing energy security. And just a few days ago, the IDB announced their own co-financing plan to the tune of $100 million towards energy security in our space. So there is some hope. I mean, we have some very, very interesting incentives and mechanisms we have engaged. For example, we recently held CARICOM US Summit held with the United States, where we looked at actually setting up an Inter-American task force for the Caribbean and as a working group to look at the issue of energy security, energy efficiency, the use of renewables, and where $20 million worth of funding was pledged. Of course, we are all signatories to the Economic Climate Partnership Agreement. Again, look at the issues of ending energy poverty, improving energy efficiency. We have signed on as an MOU with the US government to house the Alternate Energy Renewable Research Center for the Caribbean in my country, Trinidad and Tobago, to really look at opportunities to how can we appropriately leverage renewables. And for renewable use for us is critical, but it's not necessarily the big leap we'd expect. I always argue when I speak in these fora, we need, as a Caribbean and as a Latin America, to look at the phenomenon of what I term logical incrementalism. We can't jump from fossil fuel, diesel and oil, and expect to flick a light on and have solar working efficiently tomorrow. We believe it's a phased approach from fossil fuel into more friendly terms such as LNG, CNG, then look at parallel tracks with renewables. The Caribbean has done a fair amount of work in the area of renewables. For example, I mean, I'm always proud to announce Barbados, a small island of a couple 100,000 people with 35,000 households using